Okay, this is the last presentation in the panel and the last of the day. So my friend and partner Susanna and I will try to be as brief as possible. I'll try to go through some of the slides very quickly and maybe skip some of them because the visit to the museum is ahead of us. We will see if we'll have any time for discussion later on, and our chairman will decide whether to do it today or maybe tomorrow morning in the beginning session. So without further ado, the topic is artificial intelligence when implied in autonomous vessels. So from the very beginning of the development of the autonomous vessels, AI is transforming this industry. Everybody sees the degree 4 of mass as the one required to have AI systems, but actually, if you follow developments in the Maritime Safety Committee and in the industry, we will probably have a mix of AI in all 4 degrees, and actually those 4 degrees are really something which will never exist for me, at least in practice. We will have some mixed combinations with the reduced crew members probably, and extensive use of AI and extensive help of remote operating centers in these ships. So, but they are basically using a whole spectrum of technology. So various devices with sensors, processing ability, devices which are supposed to replace human perception, so our vision, our hearing. Then also technology which will be able to process all this data and to bring decisions on navigation. You are all aware of the leading industry members which are developing systems like Kongsberg, Rolls-Royce, or Sea Machines Robotics. So we'll have machine learning as an important component used for forecasting and pattern detection, computer vision for surveillance and image-based navigation, and then the necessary sensors fusion, which will combine all the information from several sensors and to give a possibility of situational awareness to AI. What are the technology used? They will collect data from cameras, from radar, also from LIDAR, which is a technology based on laser rays, giving you a 3D actually picture of the environment. With the real possibility to detect all possible objects around autonomous vessels, such as other ships, autonomous or conventional, icebergs, buoys, and everything else. AI systems will then process all these data, also from GPS, from AIS, and also including weather forecasts, so they can avoid dangerous situations at sea. And they can also determine optimal routes, so not only avoid collisions or elisions, but also try to find the optimal route, fuel-efficient route, so save money to the ship owner, and also reducing that notorious human factor in marine accidents and incidents, because AI, of course, is capable of operating 24/7 without any fatigue problems. Also, edge computing will be used on board ship for local data processing, and we will have cloud connectivity, which will enable and facilitate data sharing between the ships in the same fleet. So once that one system has completed some machine learning, they share all these results. We will use actually AI systems in monitoring, also in enhancing efficiency and in optimization. So they will be able to monitor engine performance to detect some problems, fuel systems, hull integrity, actually to predict some failures before they occur, and thus minimize the costs of maintenance and loss of time. Also minimize expenses in a sense of less crew, reduced fuel consumptions, and fewer repairs. Systems will be able to analyze energy consumptions, recommend strategies for use and for emissions, and that also will help comply with international regulations like sulfur cap and other IMO regulations. AI could detect some unusual behavior, some possible cyber attacks, and to prevent them, which are a real risk today. Also, facing all these advantages given by AI, we have still some problems and challenges, which are definitely technology maturity or immaturity. So some of the systems are already functioning in an excellent way. Some are still in the testing phases. So we'll need some time for all that to mature. Then, of course, every company, ship owner who will try to start a business of autonomous shipping will have a very, very high initial costs to try to develop his fleet and to deploy these systems, but then eventually those costs will be remunerated. Then finally, we will have some, I'm sorry that this last line is covered, but you can read part of it, ethical and liability concern, and also the problem that our legal framework is still evolving. So going to the legal framework, we can take just a short look. Craig took a wider look at the IMO instruments. I took only SOLAS and COLREG to see which would be, so of course there are no provisions directly related to the use of AI, but we can use analogy maybe and try to apply Regulation 19, which provides that ships using autopilot must let human take over in emergency situations right away. So the same rule could be applied with ships using artificial intelligence. Also, COLREGs, when they were developed, nobody dreamed about unmanned vessels. So definitely one of the results, one of the conclusions of the IMO regulatory scoping exercise was that the COLREG will have to be modified, amended to make them applicable to mass. There are also IMO CyberX guidelines, which are important because they also provide indirect aid in securing safe function of mass. And then this emerging framework, also mentioned by not just Craig, but all of my co-speakers in this panel. So the mass code, which is still in its draft phase, but the things are going forward every year. Every Maritime Safety Committee session brings new chapters to their final phase. The last one was just a couple of months ago in London, and the forecast is that the final form of the mass code will be adopted at the next MSC 111 in May 2006. It will be applied as you know, as a non-mandatory instrument. And then after the 5 years of collecting experiences from this non-mandatory application, a mandatory instrument will be probably adopted and enter into force. They moved a couple of times this date, so it will probably be still shifted, but for now it's January of 2032. So the current status, the last MSC 110, June this year. As you can see, some of the chapters were completely finalized. In some of the chapters, we have significant progress, and some remain to be sold. And specifically, Chapter 15, dealing with human element, will be addressed at the next session of intersessional working group scheduled in a month at the end of September, beginning of October. So they will focus on finalizing chapter 15. I must emphasize that draft mass code does not regulate artificial intelligence specifically, but however, some of the provisions will be indirectly applied, especially those dealing with AI systems, which will be used for navigation, collision avoidance, and decision making. So those mentioned before. And finally, this is risk assessment for maritime AI safety techniques. Definitely should be examined for their application in mass. So let's briefly focus just on the three of the chapters which could be relevant for use of artificial intelligence. First one is chapter 2, dealing with safe remote operation of mass. So ensuring that operation from remote operating center is performed in a secure, effective way, that centers have both facilities, validated and verified systems, and the qualified personnel which will be able to take over supervision of autonomous vessel. Chapter 3, dealing with communications, prescribing that it should meet, any autonomous vessel should meet the requirements of the regulation 444 of the SOLAS, enabling reliable and secure connectivity with one or more designated remote operating centers, and operator himself or herself should be able to seamlessly switch and distribute different vessel data between different communication channels. The third and the last chapter, which I will mention, is chapter 17, addressing measures for adequate responses in emergency situations. So the idea is, the goal is to ensure safety of lives, of property, of the marine environment. We should have an effective emergency response plan in force and command structure to respond sufficiently to any potential hazards that could arise from ship or center and that could result in intolerable risks. They also stress this timely handover of command and control functions between people and machines, vessels, and centers. I will end with this slide dealing with ethical framework and axiological challenges. So something which comes normal, although it's questionable with human beings. So we should teach artificial intelligence also somehow our ethical values, our ethical principles should be included in this teaching procedures to insert some human moral preferences. So human life before environment, environment before property. So if you have to choose between lesser evils, definitely choose to save life and not some expensive ship or cargo. So that's what artificial intelligence should be able to apply. Finally, regulatory principles for AI prioritize values, and also we will raise, when we have application of artificial intelligence in shipping, will definitely meet some issues dealing with civil liability, maybe even criminal, but definitely civil liability for damages. And this is the moment where I will hand over the floor to my friend Susanna. Susanna, please.
Thank you very much, Igor. You are my best partner in crime, as always. I'll be doing both things simultaneously. I'll be looking for my slides, and I'm going to start talking for the sake of time. And here we go. So my initial plan for this presentation was to present you with a hardcore presentation speech on possible scenarios when it comes to liability issues. However, then I thought that we did that last year, and I changed my plans, so to speak, and I decided to share some thoughts, some ideas that I gathered at a industry conference that both of us, together with Aref, attended in Sweden last week, actually. And I have to say, I have a sort of deja vu, because Aref was my excellent chair of the panel. So, and here we are again. And together with Aref, we literally survived long hours of slides with charts, mathematical algorithms, mathematical formulas of the mass industry business, so that you don't have to. And I'm going to try to extract some ideas from that conference so we can take some conclusions when it comes to the liability. Also, I want to say just two issues with regard to the last Maritime Safety Committee and mass developments, which I think are interesting for us, because we have spoken about that previously, and there are some developments. And finally, if the time allows, I will have a look at the developments at the EU level, but this depending on the time. And here we are, the latest MSC, Maritime Safety Committee, moving forward with MAS, as Igor mentioned. Well, last year, when we had a conference on MAS, we discussed, Frank Stevens had an excellent lecture. We discussed the topic, do we really need a MAS master? Right? There was this discussion that if we decide at some point that MAS are safe enough, do we really have to have somebody who can take that plug out? Right? For now, the IMO, and this is in the code, in the MAS code, takes a position that there has to be a human MAS master behind every MAS, even the fully autonomous MAS. Now, you might be interested to learn that there have been further developments with that. There was a decision made at the last MSC that if there is any crew, skeleton crew on board of a ship, the MAS master has to actually be on the MAS himself or herself. Right? The MAS masters have to be there, not in the IUC, not in some other space, in some other place. So they think that the overriding authority and responsibility of the MAS master, with that regard, makes him to be present on the ship. I think personally that it was rather not a legal decision, it was more a policy decision. There were some arguments brought talking about a dispute between seafarers on that MAS, and therefore for the well-being of the seafarers, the MAS master should be on board of such a vessel. But in fact, we may wonder if it's not, in fact, constraining the development of MAS. Doesn't it take away the drive for MAS, right, that we had in mind? Another development was that MSC committee, I quote, said, careful consideration should be given to the liability regime of MAS, with a particular focus on cases where higher degrees of autonomy were in place. So MSC stresses that liability issues are very important, and this is for the legal committee to discuss. And this is very interesting for me for one reason. This is because the same member states with their delegations at the legal committee took a decision that they will rather talk about liability issues, but only within the conventions that are under the purview of the legal committee. So we are talking pollution liability, we are talking passengers, we are talking wreck removal, but not general liability issues. And I find it interesting that they say one at the MSC committee, but then there have been some decisions made at the legal committee at the same time. Now, going to my takeaways from the industry side, the first thing which I would like to discuss is the problem of readable. The industry uses the term explainable, and that is the acronym for that, XIE, explainable artificial intelligence. So this is that problem, whether we will be able to read the artificial intelligence, the data that it produces. Now,
presenter.
Okay, thank you so much. So the mass code itself has a chapter on the on the software principles, and among that, it says that the systems should be explainable and should be transparent. It also contains a chapter on human-centered design, and it talks about the requirement for the availability of the data for the purposes of investigation. And the good news from the industry that was discussed at the conference is that it is one of the priorities of the industry to make those systems transparent, but then they will be transparent for the professionalists. They will not be transparent for a layperson, as you and I, or a judge, for example. And this, I think, is really important when it comes to litigation and the cases where the burden of proving fault rests on the plaintiffs, because that will require the witness expert statements, and the availability of the expert opinions may be limited. That raises the costs for the plaintiffs, and this is something to, I think, consider when talking about the possible development of the legal framework. What I also think in future we may expect, and this is also predicting the future, so we never know, as Lucy mentioned yesterday, but I think that maybe some courts we will see that, maybe some judges at some courts will be better in comprehending IE. So they will specialize in IE cases, and maybe the jurisdictional clauses will become even more important. And I think that maybe the demand for arbitration will grow in that sense, having some arbitrators being specialized in artificial intelligence related cases. Now, from that slide, I'm going to take just one takeaway, and that was the fact that it seems that on the market, there have already been, on the market of IE development, and even with regard to mass technology, there have been already some instances of acquisition of companies. Those IE small startups have been acquired by the big tech companies, right? And there was a very nice presentation done by two ladies at the conference in Malmo, who interviewed charterers and who interviewed brokers about what they think about IE, and all of them said that they think that this is the market where the bigger will get bigger and the small will get smaller. And I think that this is something to think about when we talk about limitation of liability. Like, really, we should think whether we really want limitation of liability for the big tech IE developers, right? The LLMC talks about limitation of liability for any person for whose act, neglect, or default the ship owner is responsible, leaving the details to the national law applicable. ROCs, remote operators, I don't need that, no worries, thank you so much. Yes, but IE software developers, the big tech, do they really need limitation of liability? I'm not so sure about that. I'm looking at the clock, I'm gonna skip other takeaways. Meanwhile, at the European Union level, you might be interested. We also discussed that last year, and I remember Frank giving a lecture at the CMI Tokyo, talking about one of the instruments of the European Union that actually was adopted, and this was IE regulation. IE regulation had a companion, liability directive, product liability directive. It has a slightly different name. This is in force as well. But there was a third companion, and the third companion was this IE liability directive. The longer name was Directive on Adapting Non-Contractual Civil Liability Rules to Artificial Intelligence, and that proposal has been withdrawn. That's February 2025. The European Commission says this is because there was no feasible agreement between the member states. People said that it was premature, right, to adopt such a directive. This act was very modest. Despite its very promising title, it gave only a rebuttable presumption of causal link between the IE input and the damage, and it also gave a possibility of a court order to disclose the evidence. There are a lot of more critics. I'm going to skip that. We don't have time for that. But since the directive was withdrawn, now I'm thinking that European Parliament will be probably trying to push the ideas which were initiated in 2017. They had a resolution talking about strict liability. And in fact, very recently, there was the European Parliament survey or report study, I think that was the name, revealed for the possible development of IE liability in Europe, and it calls for strict liability, right? So we may be seeing that interplay going on for the future, and this is something that we have to observe as we talk about mass. And with that, I'm going to leave you with my last slide, which is something that I heard also at the conference in Malmö from the industry, saying that on one hand, they said that fragmented legal system hinders the business, but also they said at the same time that too much regulation also hinders business. So we have to find a golden medium. Is that the
balance?
Balance, yes. Thank you so much. And I don't have a short answer of how to do that. Maybe you have, and hopefully we'll be able to discuss that. I'm not sure if still today, but maybe tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you.